Hi, I'm Eric Opiela, and I'm seeking to serve Texas as our next Texas Agriculture Commissioner. I come from a small town in South Texas. It's Karnes City. We ranch in Karnes, Bee, and Live Oak counties. We have about 2,300 acres there, cow-calf operation. I also practice law as well. I've represented landowners in private property rights cases and water rights issues for over a decade, in addition to my involvement helping build the Republican Party in the state. As a volunteer with the State Republican Party. You know, we just talked about how I serve on the State Republican Executive Committee, representing all of South Texas from Laredo to Austin down to San Pat to San Patricia County down on the Gulf Coast. And we have done a lot towards building the Republican Party in a place that is not very friendly to Republicans. Back over a decade ago, we didn't have a Republican majority in any of the counties, and now we have Republican majority commissioners courts in an area that's 70% Hispanic, 70% Democrat in the past, but now we have Republican majorities in those counties. I've been proud to have been a part in building the party in that part of the state, and frankly, the entire state when I was executive director of the State Republican Party.
Are there any areas in the Department of Agriculture specifically that you're concerned about that you see as problematic that need to be reformed?
Well, the number one issue impacting the future of Texas agriculture, and frankly, our entire economy in the state, the number one limiter to our economic growth is the availability and management of our groundwater resources and our surface water resources. I believe that the next Texas Agriculture Commissioner has to be a statewide leader on the issue of water. You know, agriculture is the number two industry in this state. Energy, the energy industry, is the number one economic driver of the state. Both rely on availability of water in this state. And of course, you know, we're in the midst of a 1950s style drought right now with about 3 times as many people in the state than we had in the 1950s. And it's important that we have an ag commissioner that has the experience that I have in working on water rights issues, that understands groundwater law and surface water law, and not just throw money at a problem. You know, too often in government, they like to throw money at a problem and say it's solved. We have to look at the underlying policy issues of how groundwater and surface water is managed in the state. We have a patchwork quilt of regulations that in some cases over-regulate, in some cases under-regulate. And it's important that we respect the private property rights of landowners in their groundwater and their surface water rights when we try to make water more available in the state to meet our growing needs in both energy, agriculture, and frankly, just population growth.
On the topic of throwing money at water, you know, Prop 6, you know, dedicates $2 billion from the Rainy Day Fund. It was passed by voters this past year. However, our understanding is only 10% is dedicated to agricultural use.
Or to rural Texas.
To rural Texas. What can you do to ensure that more than that 10% is dedicated?
Well, number one, the House Bill 2, which led to Proposition 6, took away our rural representation on the Texas Water Development Board. The Water Development Board is tasked with allocating this $2 billion and frankly the $6 billion that came before that to be used for water infrastructure projects in this state. And I think it's important that next legislative session that we restore our representation from agriculture that we lost. When we consolidated it down to a 3-member water development board, we lost that representation. We have to go back and get some representation from agriculture, which is the number 2 industry in this state. And frankly, I think that the energy sector, which uses ever-increasing amounts of water and is funding the money that is going into the Rainy Day Fund. A lot of people don't realize this, that agriculture and energy fund the Rainy Day Fund. The Rainy Day Fund is the severance taxes that come out of the pockets of landowners who have oil and gas production on their property. About a quarter of the fund comes from that. 3/4 of the fund comes from a severance tax on the oil and gas produced by the oil and gas companies in this state. And that's why we have an increasing amount of money in the fund to be used on important projects like water. But it's important that we have some representation with our taxation and make sure that, you know, even if we don't get a quarter of the resources that are being set aside by the voters in Proposition 6, which, you know, we pay a quarter of the money into those resources, we realize that rural Texas and Texas agriculture is, you know, less than a quarter of the population of the state. Let's just try to work with the legislature in coming legislative sessions to try and make sure that the projects that are going to be funded with that are going to be in rural Texas, that we have important infrastructure needs in rural Texas that are taken care of. Let me give you one example of one of the cheapest ways, most cost-effective ways to make water more available in the state. And it's to deal with some of the critical infrastructure needs that we have in our small municipalities and rural communities in the state. We have some rural water systems that lose half of the water that is pumped, treated, and put into the system before it ever reaches a customer. It's called system loss. Our average statewide is 12% of the water that is put into our municipal, large municipal, small municipal, and rural water systems is lost to waste, to system loss. That's some of the cheapest water to save and recover and make available for the growing needs of this state. And I think that before we look at building new reservoirs, these large ticket items that people like to put their names on, that we deal with some of the serious critical infrastructure needs that we have with our rural communities. We have 2 communities in this state that have been trucking water daily since June in order to meet the needs of their water system. Those are some of the cheapest, smallest dollar item fixes that we can make before we look at some pie-in-the-sky type of projects. And I think that's important that the Water Development Board look at as we move forward.
One thing you said was that HB 2 took away rural representation. Yes. Is that because you'll have to work with the legislature, is that a problem? The fact that HB 2 got passed, is that a problem with House leadership? Do you think House leadership needs to change so that you can get better policies enacted?
Well, House Bill 2 was a result, unfortunately, like many things that happen in Austin, a dispute between the governor and some of his appointees about the direction of the agency, and also with the Senate leadership and the House leadership of the different committees that deal with water issues, and whether or not to have new resources go towards direct grants or a revolving loan fund, which is what ended up being passed in House Bill 2. So as you make the sausage a lot of times in the legislature, bad policy comes out of some disputes. And that board was totally gutted as of September 1st of this year, and then replaced by the 3-member Texas Water Development Board with the 3 full-time commissioners or members, one representing the engineering background, one representing law, and one with a finance background. I think it's simple for the legislature to come back next session and add 2 more positions to that board without upsetting the entire balance of House Bill 2.
Do you think a board as powerful as that should be elected by the general public?
Well, I think it is important that we have a statewide elected official that is focused on water as an issue, and that's what I want to be as our agriculture commissioner. I think that given the task of this office has to ensure the future of Texas agriculture and rural Texas. I think it's incumbent upon our agriculture commissioner to take a leadership role as a statewide elected official on this issue. That board deals with the finances of water development, and part of the problem is that we have a various patchwork group of agencies dealing with regulation of water in the state, from Texas Commission on Environmental Quality to the river authorities in the state to over 100 different groundwater conservation districts in the state. And the legislature needs to take a serious look in coming sessions at the underlying policy. Is it better to manage water on political lines or on the lines of an aquifer, so that you can protect the private property rights and have equal property rights between people on one side of a county line and on the other side, that they're in the same aquifer? Make sure that the regulations that are ensuring that our private property right in groundwater, for instance, is protected. That's the reason why we have government, to protect our life, liberty, and property rights that are given to us by God. That's why we are here as government. If we're not doing that, then what are we here doing? And I think that too often this patchwork quilt of regulation that we have just doesn't make sense from either a scientific background, from a legal background, or from just a fundamental fairness and private property rights background.
One thing, especially on the property rights issue, and this has been in the news a lot lately, is a lot of farmers are concerned about GMO manufacturers and being sued over cross-seed contamination. Where do you stand on that?
Well, farmers need to be able to continue to produce the bountiful crops that we have been able to produce here in Texas with an ever-increasing burden on us in terms of water use, in terms of chemical use. But I think that, unfortunately, when seed manufacturers who have a private property right in their intellectual property sue individual farmers who have no intent to violate those private property rights, but happen to have what's called GMO drift. I don't know if you've heard of that term. That's where your neighbor might farm a patented technology, might farm a crop that has patented technology in it. You don't. And through just natural drift of pollination, how seed drifts, we have that crop come over and contaminate your crop. I think that we need to make sure that the private property rights of farmers who don't use GMO technology are protected, as well as the private property rights of the seed manufacturers as well. And I think that too often we have an imbalance in the judicial system in regards to the laws right now that don't protect the private property rights of people who don't want to use GMO seeds, as well as protecting the private property rights of those that do.
One of the big programs you'll oversee is the Texas School Lunch and
Yes.
Breakfast Program, and that was expanded this year to include more free breakfasts for more students.
Unfortunately.
How are you going to manage that those possibly millions of children added to the rolls, and at the same time, how are you going to ensure that the nutritional value of that food is maintained or even increased?
No, and you bring up a really important point of this office that a lot of people out in the public just don't understand, that the Texas Department of Agriculture has as the largest part of its budget, about $1.9 billion a year is spent on what is called direct nutrition assistance. That's the euphemism for school lunches, school breakfasts, as you were talking about, summer feeding programs for school children, and the Meals on Wheels, elderly, adult daycare feeding programs. Just to put this in perspective, the entire budget of the rest of the Department of Agriculture is about the same size as the administrative cost, about $500 million of the Direct Nutrition Assistance Program in general. This is a program that, in my opinion, has gotten out of hand in terms of the growth of government. This is all federal money that's being passed through to the Texas Department of Agriculture that is then passed through to local school districts and local jurisdictions in order to provide those resources. And too often, the nutrition of kids is shortchanged, I think, by some of the federal regulation that we have. And I think it's important that our Texas Agriculture Commissioner take a stand to increase the amount of Texas-grown agricultural products, our fresh produce, rather than something that might meet a technical requirement that's in the USDA regulation, but hasn't been alive for over a year. It's been sitting in a freezer somewhere in a warehouse. And I think it's important that we take a look at the bloating of government that's happened in the Department of Agriculture itself. Not to any fault of our previous agriculture commissioners who have done a good job at managing this agency, but as a result of a federal program that's gotten out of hand.
Do you think we should pay for the program ourselves, reject the federal funds, say no to the regulation?
Well, funny thing is we've seen that happen before. You remember when Governor Perry rejected the education funds a couple of sessions ago, and the Department of Education just ran around Texas and went to individual school districts where you might not have the ability to, for instance, with an elected Texas Commissioner of Agriculture, make the stand to fix some of the flawed federal regulations that are part of this program. For instance, I believe in personal accountability. On Saturday I was over in Katy and was proud to participate in the NFL Play 60 program, which helps to encourage good nutrition, healthy eating, healthy exercise among children. But with parents in Texas bringing their children to those things rather than government. I think that when we try to have government manage the health and well-being of our children, as government is wont to do in virtually everything with our education system in this state, and frankly our nation, the decrease in personal responsibility of parents for the health and healthy eating habits in their children is lost. And I think that it's important that we refocus this program on ensuring that parents and frankly local schools have the ability to manage the health and nutrition of the meals that the kids eat, not just during the school day, but also at home as well, which is where people learn their healthy eating and exercise habits. And so that's a change in focus that I want to take as our agriculture commissioner to increase the ability of personal responsibility, which is a fundamental conservative principle that I share and I think the majority of Texans share in the administration of this program.
Since you're going to manage a number of grant and loan programs for farmers, ranching operations, should the state be involved in the financial services business, or should we let the free market ride on that?
Well, and this is another little known aspect of the agency is we have the Texas Agricultural Finance Authority that has been created by the legislature back, unfortunately you remember Jim Hightower. When he was agriculture commissioner, a lot of these programs had their inception. In the 20 years that program has been in effect, it had to be bailed out by the legislature. A lot of people don't know this, but about, and I might not remember the exact amount, but I think it was about $9 million of appropriations had to be made because of defaults on this program for over 20 years. I am concerned with the Department of Agriculture and the Agricultural Finance Authority undermining the free market and having risk associated with being in the financial services industry. I do think that there is one aspect of the program that's not funded by tax dollars, that's actually funded by farmers and ranchers. When they get their license plates, there's an additional fee that goes to the Young Farmer Rancher Grant Program, which I think is an important aspect of farmers helping farmers, that is not using tax dollars to try and, for instance, buy down loan rates as the current program does, in introducing risk on the part of the Department of Agriculture that, frankly, government shouldn't be in the business of.
Well, I want to thank you for joining me today. How can more people find out about your campaign?
Sure. Thank you for having me. I have a really hard to spell, hard to pronounce name from the oldest Polish settlement in North America, Panna Maria, Texas, about 60 miles southeast of San Antonio. It's Eric Opiela. It's E-R-I-C, Opiela, O-P-I-E-L-A.com. You can go to our website. You can find out more at the website or on Facebook, or follow me on Twitter, EOPL on Twitter. Or, and this is something that a lot of people don't do as statewide elected officials or candidates, I'll give you my phone number. Please give me a call, 512-791-6336. I want to hear from you. That rings on my cell phone, not to a staff member. I want to hear from you. I want to hear from not only people in Texas agriculture and in rural Texas, but also in urban Texas as well, because this office is an office that is elected by an ever-increasing urban population in the state of Texas, and too few of our Republican primary voters don't even vote in the office of Texas Agriculture Commissioner. More than half the people in Dallas, for instance, or frankly statewide, 33% left it blank in the last election. So I think it's important that we all look at the office of Texas Agriculture Commissioner, the importance of having someone who has a background like I do in water, in private property rights, and actually getting things done at the legislature, and making sure that this office serves all of Texas and puts these conservative principles into practice in a statewide office. And I thank you for having me here.
Thank you. Best of luck to you.
Thank you.